Hi, I'm Dr. Jason Miller. I'm a physician with Clinical Trials of Texas. I'm a psychiatrist. Early in my career, I was asked to give a talk at a nursing home about Alzheimer's. I approached it in the same way I always do. I gathered up facts. I thought about how I wanted to present the information. And on the day of the event, I was really disappointed because it turned out it was only like 5 people. And so we sat down at a table and decided to have a discussion about it. And the first thing I told them was, hey, I'm going to talk to you today about Alzheimer's dementia. And right off the bat, one of the gentlemen stopped me and he said, "You mean old timers, right?" And I kind of smiled because it's a joke that I'd heard before. And I said, "Alzheimer's, the disease." And he said, "You mean old timers?" And it was clear that he actually thought that that was the name of it. As we talked, he also had thought that everybody who got over a certain age got Alzheimer's disease. It turns out that that's not true, but it's a super common misperception. About 1 in 10 Americans past the age of 65 has Alzheimer's disease. So while it's very common, it's hardly everybody. It turns out that in 2011, there were roughly 4.5 million cases of Alzheimer's disease. However, as our population ages, by the year 2050, they suspect it'll be as many as 15 million people. Alzheimer's isn't just about memory loss. It causes significant limitations in how long you live. In fact, it's the 6th leading cause of death in the United States. And of the top 10 diseases, it's the only one that doesn't have a cure. It doesn't have a way to prevent it. And we don't have a meaningful way to slow it down right now. When people think about Alzheimer's disease, it can be pretty scary. In fact, it's so scary that a lot of people won't even talk about it. If you can't do anything about it, if you can't treat it, it starts to feel kind of hopeless. And people don't like to think or dwell on things that are hopeless. If you know that your mom or your dad had Alzheimer's and you're faced with the idea that you might get it, man, that's a hard thing to think about. That's a big pill to swallow. There are so many people in America right now who are facing exactly that situation where they feel like maybe it's hopeless. Maybe there's nothing that we can do. There's been a lot of people who take advantage of that. There's a lot of supplements, there's a lot of vitamins, there's a lot of shows right now about Alzheimer's because there's so many people now who are really very scared about this. And yet, we still don't have a cure. We don't have a way to treat it, and we don't have a way to slow it down yet. But it's not hopeless. We can recall that 100 years ago, there weren't any cures or ways to prevent any of the other 9 diseases in the top 10. 100 years from now, maybe Alzheimer's has been cured. Maybe we find a way forward with this. But right now we haven't. And we're looking at an epidemic level of people who are going to have Alzheimer's over the course of the next 20 to 30 years. With 15 million Americans potentially affected, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars being spent on their care. In fact, one estimate put it at being something like $40 billion being spent on the care for people with Alzheimer's. The economic impact is important and shouldn't be understated. However, what we really care about is how our loved ones are doing. We care about whether mom or dad lives a good, full life and that they don't get to a point where it's hard for them to remember us. Alzheimer's isn't just about memory loss. We think about it that way. We think about it being forgetting a recipe or forgetting your way home, getting lost in familiar places. And while those things are true, that's not the only thing that happens. A lot of times there's personality changes. So mom or dad, who's always been happy or optimistic, suddenly is more cantankerous. They argue more, they fuss with you. They don't just forget things, but they maybe accuse you of things. A common thing that'll happen is that the person can't remember where they've placed something, their wallet, their keys, their glasses, and rather than just looking for it, which would be frustrating enough, they grow to suspect that somebody's moved them, that something bad has happened. They worry that people are breaking into their home and doing things to them. They might worry that their loved ones are plotting against them. Again, they might get argumentative, might get more angry than usual. Or it might be something as subtle as they just don't seem to be able to sit still anymore. They wander from one room to another. They look around like they're looking for something, but it's just not clear. They fuss with things all the time. Those kind of behaviors are a lot of times what eventually causes people to get tired. Not the patient, but their caretaker. It's hard to take care of somebody who's moving around all the time. It's hard to take care of somebody who's angry all the time or who's arguing with you. And as a consequence of that, those kinds of behaviors are often what eventually leads families to decide that somebody needs to be in an assisted living center or maybe even a nursing home if their memory loss and their ability to think through things has gotten severe enough. When we talk about the dysfunction associated with Alzheimer's disease, we know that there's stages. In the earliest stage of Alzheimer's disease, we call it mild cognitive impairment. Mild cognitive impairment happens to a lot of people, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to go on to have Alzheimer's disease, but it turns out that over a long period of time, that about 50% of people who have that earliest version of memory loss will go on to develop Alzheimer's. In its next phases, where Alzheimer's becomes a named disease, where you meet the clinical criteria for it, you can be mild, and that person might be still living at home. They may be doing things that are relatively independent, and then it progresses to moderate. And at moderate, some of that independence is lost. They may require more caretaking. They may require people to remind them of things, and they may not be able to recall the things they can't recall. So they're not as aware of their memory loss. And then finally, in the severe phases, they might start to forget people around them. They might not remember the names of their children. They may not even be able to recognize them. That's the stage that we all fear, but because up until now there's been so little that we can do about it, that when people begin to suspect that their memory is slipping, it's hard to talk about it. Right now, there's an enormous amount of research going into looking at Alzheimer's disease. We understand so much more about its physiology, we understand about its neurochemistry, and there is a lot of looking at this, trying to understand how we can make improvements, either to slow its progress, to find some sort of a prevention, or maybe a cure. We're years from that. The research that we're doing is looking at a variety of different types of drugs. They're promising, but we don't have one yet that's a standout as far as a cure or a prevention. But we're trying. At Clinical Trials of Texas, we're committed to trying to help find a cure or a way to prevent this illness because there's so many Americans affected by it. One of the things that we've found is that the most difficult part of doing a trial is finding the right kinds of patients. We know statistically that there's millions and millions of Americans affected by Alzheimer's disease. We know that the pool of people who could benefit from research is great. When people are faced with a disease like cancer, for example, we know that sometimes there's cancers that simply aren't curable yet. And when those cases happen, it's not unusual that people will then turn to research. Not because they necessarily think that the research is going to be what cures them, but because with a cancer that's incurable, they start to think about other people. They start to have the thought that perhaps what they're going through could help somebody else someday. Alzheimer's is similar right now. While we can't cure it, while we can't prevent it, we can sure make certain that other people benefit from our experience. At Clinical Trials of Texas, we're doing trials right now looking at Alzheimer's. We need participation, and we'd love to have your help. I'm Dr. Jason Miller with Clinical Trials of Texas. Thank you for listening.